Good day, everyone. So now we're done with the absorption and distribution part of the ADME system. Now, class, let's talk about the elimination part, which mainly comprises the metabolism and excretion part. So for today's topic, class, we have the following outline. We will be discussing about biotransformation. So we'll be discussing specifically more on drug metabolism, the metabolic pathways. Then we'll be talking about drug excretion, specifically renal and hepatic excretion. And then lastly, class, we'll do some computations regarding drug clearance. So we'll also be talking about creatinine clearance as well. So for today's objective class, our main goals for today's lecture would be simply to be able to understand how drugs are metabolized in the body, know the impacts of drug metabolism to drug effects and plasma concentration, and understand how the kidney works, and do some basic computations associated with drug elimination. So with that, let's proceed to our main topic for today, which is all about drug elimination. Now, class, the task of drug elimination can be summarized using the mnemonics CHORE. Okay, this one is actually more specific for metabolism. So CHORE here, class, is an acronym for conjugation, hydrolysis, oxidation, reduction, and excretion. So the conjugation reaction here, class, is actually pertaining to metabolic pathway, which is the phase 2 metabolic pathway. While hydrolysis, oxidation, and reduction, all three processes belong to the phase 1 metabolic pathway. Okay, then of course excretion involves the kidneys. So let's talk about biotransformation, class. Biotransformation is simply the process whereby a substance is changed from one chemical to another by a chemical reaction within the body. So basically, class, metabolism or metabolic transformations are terms frequently used for biotransformation processes. So they are both synonymous. So basically, class, when we talk about biotransformation, we're basically talking about metabolic processes or metabolism. Now, what's the purpose of metabolism? So its main purpose, class, is to provide energy for body function and maintenance. This is something you've probably heard of so many times na. Breakdown of ingested food, so such as basal metabolism, and convert foreign compounds to a more polar, water-soluble, and highly ionized form. Now, in the case, class, of biopharmaceutics and pharmacokinetics, our main topic would, of course, be falling under this one. The conversion of compounds, such as drugs, to something that's more polar, water-soluble, and highly ionized form. If you remember, class, in our lessons from extensive ionization, a drug that is converted into its more polar, water-soluble, highly ionized form is ready for excretion. Right? So ready na siya for elimination. Now let's talk about drug metabolism. Drug metabolism, class, is simply the conversion of one chemical entity to another. Now the metabolic reactions for drugs can transform either an active drug, okay, to something that's less active. Now this was the most common pathway that drug undergoes, okay, when they are metabolized. Or the conversion of a prodrug, okay, it's something that's inactive or less active, into something more active. A good example of this, class, would be codeine. Right? Codeine, class, is a prodrug. Okay, as you all know, class, codeine is an antitussive drug, okay, used for cough. Pero, class, since it's a prodrug, it's actually converted into something that's an active, into its active component, which is morphine. Now, as you all know, class, morphine is highly addicting. That's the reason why, class, codeine is classified under, you need to have an S2 license prior to prescribing codeine, because we all know that codeine can be converted to morphine, which is, of course, highly addicting. Okay? And what else? The conversion of an active drug into an active, or something that's more active or reactive intermediate. A good example of this, class, would, of course, be paracetamol. Okay, paracetamol, class, is already active on its own. However, class, it can be converted to its active toxic metabolite, which is known as the NAPQI, okay, which is hepatotoxic. So it can damage the liver. All right. So it's the conversion of an active drug to something that's more reactive, or in a sense, more toxic. Okay. Now, of course, because the sites of metabolism, drug metabolism, there are so many sites for that. Sorry. Okay. However, because the principal site, of course, would still be the liver. This is the major organ responsible for drug metabolism. Now, what are the general pathways for drug metabolism? So basically, class, we can divide the pathways into two. We have the phase 1 and then the phase 2 pathways. So phase 1 class involves, again, the hydrolysis, oxidation, reduction, while phase 2 involves the conjugation reactions. Right? Yung chore natin kanina. Okay. So oxidation, reduction, hydrolysis, these three falls under phase 1, and the conjugation reaction falls under phase 2. Now, class, for phase 1 reactions, it's mostly involving enzymes, specifically, class, the CYP450. Okay, so these are the phase 1 reactions involve enzymes resulting to oxidized metabolites. And the problem with this one, class, is most often than not, phase 1 reaction creates toxic metabolites. Okay, the hydrolytic oxidation or reduction, okay, the oxidation or reduction reactions being done by these enzymes, class, can actually create a more toxic metabolites for most of the time. However, class, unlike that of phase 2, most of the time, this is called also the detoxification reaction, wherein you create a inactive, non-toxic metabolite. Okay, ang nangyayari kasi dito, class, sa phase 2, oftentimes, what we do here is simply add a conjugate. Kumbaga, class, you're adding an exogenous a substance to your drug to make it more polar, inactive, at the same time, less toxic. Okay, and that's usually under the phase 2 metabolic pathways. So phase 1, class, drugs are oxidized or reduced into a more polar form, and oftentimes, class, it leads to the formation of more toxic or more carcinogenic metabolites as compared to the parent drug. Compare that, class, to the phase 2 reaction, which involves the conjugation reaction. Ang ginagawa lang dito, class, simply you add a conjugate. Conjugates, class, can come in the form of glutathione or other conjugates and increases the polarity of the drug. And usually, class, the result of phase 2 reactions is the formation of an inactive compound, which is already water-soluble, ready for excretion. So for phase 1 reactions, class, we have three processes. Okay, we have the oxidation, reduction, hydrolysis. Oxidation is simply the addition of oxygen or the removal of hydrogen. So addition of oxygen or removal of hydrogen. While for reduction, it's simply the opposite. You're adding hydrogen or removing oxygen. And hydrolysis, of course, involves the use of water. Okay? Water ang ginagamit nating catalyst here to create a reaction. So such as the case of ester and amide hydrolysis. Under oxidation, class, you have multiple examples here. Aromatic hydroxylation, side chain hydroxylation, NOS dealkylation, deamination. While for the reduction, we have the azo reduction and nitro reduction. Okay, for phase 2, on the other hand, class, this one adds conjugates. Okay, simply adds conjugates. Wherein we have here, class, glucuronide, okay, peptide, methylation, acetylation, sulfation or sulfate conjugation, and mercaptopuric acid synthesis. All of which, class, again, will just simply produce a compound to add or to attach to your drug product, making it more water-soluble, less active, less toxic. Okay, and these are just the examples. Now, here are some examples, class, of drugs, metabolic transformation to either inactive, something that's from inactive to active, and then from something that's active to something more reactive. So examples, class, would include the conversion of a prodrug to active, itong mga drugs na to, enalapril, cortisone, and so on and so forth. Okay, all of these drugs are converted to their active form on the other side. Okay, so enalapril is converted to enalaprilat. Okay, and cortisone is converted to hydrocortisone. Hetacillin is converted to ampicillin via demethylation process. Okay, and so on and so forth. Now here naman, on the other hand, we have the conversion of an active drug to something active pa ulit. Such as heroin, codeine. Okay, convert to morphine. Diazepam to oxazepam. And so on and so forth. Okay? So another one, class, the conversion of an active drug to something that's more reactive. Such as that, yung kanina, paracetamol natin into NAPKI. Na N-acetyl P benzoquinone imine. right? And benzopyrenes to carcinogenic metabolites. Or the conversion class of a drug from its lipid-soluble form to a more water-soluble form, meaning ready for excretion na. So, amphetamine is converted to phenylacetone via the amination process. Okay, which is this one is readily excreted. And then phenobarbital to hydroxyphenobarbital via hydroxylation process. So metabolizing enzymes class play a vital role for inactivation of subsequent elimination of drugs not easily cleared through the kidneys. So meaning class, some drugs, okay, like theophylline, phenytoin, acetaminophen, okay, these are drugs class that do not pass the kidneys easily. Remember, some drugs can be eliminated in its unchanged form. Okay, so that's possible. Pero some drugs requires biotransformation prior to elimination by the kidneys. So again, example of which would be theophylline, phenytoin, and acetaminophen. So most of these metabolizing enzymes have broad substrate specificity. So meaning one enzyme can catalyze the metabolism of so many different drugs. And the most common example of this class is the CYP 450 enzymes. Okay, specifically the CYP3A4 isozyme. All right, CYP3A4 isozyme class is a subfamily or an isozyme of CYP450. Okay, wherein class it metabolizes nearly all or majority of the drug products out in the market. Okay, meron din namang iba CYP2D6 like the CYP2D6. Okay, halimbawa ito naman ay it's an enzyme usually metabolizing clopidogrel. Okay, so marami pa yan class na different forms of cytochrome P450 or isozymes. Right? So just so you know class, also just to inform everyone, okay, these enzymes class have broad specificity. Oftentimes kasi sinasabi natin that most enzymes are specific to one substrate lang, not for drugs not for enzymes metabolizing drugs. Okay, oftentimes these enzymes can target multiple drugs. So what's the relationship of drug concentration to enzyme concentration? Now, enzyme concentration class is constant. Okay, meaning that we have a finite amount of enzymes inside the body at any given site. However, drug concentration may vary depending on the dose that we're giving. So here now comes class the concept of saturation. Okay, so when drug concentration is relatively low, lower than the enzyme concentration, okay, so meaning there's an abundance of enzymes to catalyze the reaction. Therefore, dahil mas marami ang enzymes kesa sa substrate, which is the drug, the rate of metabolism class follows a first-order process. Okay? But, what happens now if the enzyme system is saturated? Okay? Once the concentration of drug is higher than that of the available enzymes, okay, saturation takes place. So, the enzyme starts to saturate. So, since it's starting to saturate now, class, the rate of reactions changes from first order to a zero-order process. Hence, the Michaelis-Menten equation now can be used to describe the entire process. And this is how the Michaelis-Menten equation class looks like. Actually, this is not the equation. This is the graph used to assess the Michaelis-Menten equation. Vmax here class refers to the maximum velocity at which the metabolism can take place. So max velocity of metabolism. So meaning at this point, that's the maximum reaction, okay, that can take place. And then class, of course, initially at low amounts of substrate, okay, or the concentration of the drug at low amounts, it always starts as a first order process, not until you reach the saturation point. Okay, saturation point. Once you start reaching this point, class, no matter how high you increase the dose, the rate of metabolism will not change. Okay, it's not going to change. Hence, the process becomes a zero-order process. Okay? So the P450 system class, the liver microsomal drug oxidation reduction system, is responsible for the metabolism of drugs. Okay, so it's a family of isozymes located in the endoplasmic reticulum of the hepatocytes. And cytochrome P450 can either be induced or inhibited. Okay, so class, from these isozymes, sobrang dami niyan. So I won't be discussing everything. Alright, you'll have a separate discussion regarding that, okay, when you talk about organic medicinals or when you start to have lessons on organic medicinals. So class CYP450 can either be induced or inhibited. So what are the factors affecting the rate and extent of metabolism? Of course, racial and genetic differences. Some people class are born fast metabolizers, while some are slow metabolizers. So that usually depends on the genes. Okay? There's a genetic influence involving here. Alright? So, halimbawa, most Caucasians class are considered to be slow metabolizers, while Filipinos or Asians are oftentimes considered as fast metabolizers for certain drugs. Okay? So, let's not talk too much about that. Environmental factors can play a vital role in metabolism. And then, of course, the most common or our concern would be more on drug interactions and physiologic conditions and drug dosage regimens. So in terms of drug interaction class, certain drugs can either induce or inhibit metabolic pathways. Okay? Can either induce the production of more enzymes or inhibit the enzymes that are already available. So certain drugs can do that. And then some physiologic conditions and the drug dosage regimen that you're using. Now, certain enzymes class or drug substances can alter enzyme activity in the liver microsomes. So this will often result to a more faster metabolism. Now, alcohol causes autoinduction. Autoinduction class is simply referring to them. It's a term that's used to to define the way certain drugs can induce their own metabolism. Okay, such as alcohol. Or phenobarbital class, phenytoin, and other anticonvulsant are enzyme inducers naman and can stimulate the rate of metabolism of another agent, or what we call the foreign induction. Now, please take note, class, this process, the foreign induction, is a long process. Okay, it takes time. Okay, meaning, class, if a drug is an enzyme inducer, it won't work immediately. It will take time. Okay, oftentimes, class, what these enzyme inducers do is they stimulate your liver cells to produce more enzyme. And by doing that, class, the liver cells are actually, it's not going to produce the enzymes immediately. It takes time. All right? So matagal. Okay? It's a slow process. Yun na lang. So, kung ikaw ba, class, halimbawa, one time mo palang isang beses kang gumamit ng enzyme inducer, matatakot ka na ba? So, syempre, class, hindi. Okay? Kasi nga, baka by the time that, if you only use that enzyme inducer once, okay, it's not going to cause significant effect in your body because, again, its enzyme-inducing property takes time. Okay? Pero if you use that drug class for a long period of time, then yes, it might be a concern. Okay? Now, as for enzyme inhibition naman, drugs compete with each other, even those structurally unrelated, for the pathways of their metabolism. So will result to a slower rate of metabolism, thus prolonging the pharmacologic effects of drugs whose metabolism is inhibited. Now, of course, class, if you prolong the pharmacologic effects of drugs, anong pwedeng end product niyan? It could lead to toxicity. In enzyme induction, class, the worst thing na pwedeng mangyari sa'yo is wala. Okay, kasi nawala yung effect ng ibang gamot. So that's the worst thing that could happen. In the case of enzyme inhibition, class, the worst thing that could happen is it could prolong the effect of your drugs, leading to toxicity. Now, class, if enzyme induction takes a long time to for it to take place, enzyme inhibition, class, works fast. Okay, the effects of enzyme inhibition is fast. Okay? Kaya nga between enzyme inducers and enzyme inhibitors, class, mas delikado ang enzyme inhibitors because their effects are fast and they can lead to toxicity. Okay? An example of an enzyme inhibitor would be cimetidine. Now, here are some examples, class, of enzyme inducers and mnemonics I often use to remember the enzyme inducers. So we have the Boston Red Sox gotta play quality competition. Boston Red Sox is a baseball team, if I'm not mistaken. So these are barbiturates, rifampin, glycefulvin, phenytoin, quinidine, carbamazepine. So again, class, most enzyme inducers are anticonvulsants. Okay? Except, of course, for rifampin, griseofulvin. Alright? And quinidine, of course. These are antimicrobial drugs. Antimalarial, antifungal, antibiotic, ang rifampin. Okay, another mnemonics class that we can use, PRC. Okay? Phenobarbital, rifampicin, then carbamazepine, cigarette, and charcoal broiled foods. So those are examples of enzyme inducers. What about for inhibitors? Okay, we have the mnemonics class IC-KEGs. Okay, IC-KEGs stands for isoniazid, cimetidine, chloramphenicol, ketoconazole, erythromycin, grapefruit, and sulfonamides. Now, one thing class you might notice here is that majority of these are antibiotics or antimicrobials like isoniazid, chloramphenicol, ketoconazole is a antifungal, erythromycin, and sulfonamide. So most of these are antimicrobials. Okay? Grapefruit, ito nga pala, ang common question. Sir, pag ako ba ay nagbe-maintenance, hindi na ba ako pwedeng uminom ng grapefruit? Just so you know, class, it takes liters. Okay? Liters of grapefruit juice to have an inhibitory effect. Okay, so if you're just taking 1 glass of grapefruit juice, class, don't be scared. Isang glass lang yan. Not unless yung glass mo, sige, ito kalaki. Okay? Sing laki ng 1.5. Huwag naman sana. Alright? Pero class, it takes a few liters of grapefruit juice to induce inhibition. Okay? For it to have an appreciable enzyme inhibiting effects. Alright? So, kung inom ka naman ng 1 glass, huwag kang mag-alala. Okay? Another mnemonics class that we can use is Medvic. So, that's metronidazole. Actually, it's pronounced as metronidazole. Nasanay tayo, metronidazole na lang. Erythromycin, disulfiram, valproic acid, isoniazid, cimetidine, chloramphenicol, and ketoconazole. Now, class, remember a while ago, I mentioned that most anticonvulsants, are enzyme inducers. So, the exception to that class would be valproic acid, okay, which is an enzyme inhibitor. So, what are physiologic conditions affecting the rate and extent of drug metabolism? So, we have age, gender, diet, nutrition, body temp, and of course, genetics pa rin. Hindi mawawala ang genetics, the genes. Okay? So, the first passive metabolism naman pala, class. Okay? You've been hearing about this over and over again. Okay? So, let's just refresher again. So, class, the first pass effect is known as a presystemic metabolism. So, drugs may be metabolized in the GI epithelium during absorption or by liver before they reach the systemic circulation. So, first pass effect, class, is one of the main reasons why most per orally administered medications and deep rectal administrations have poor bioavailabilities. Okay? When I say, class, deep rectal administration, yung naipush ng bonggang-bongga. Okay, yung gamot. So, sublingual, buccal, and rectal routes bypass presystemic metabolism. Okay, provided, class, you don't overly push the medication na aabot na siya sa colon. Okay? So, sabi nga natin, class, the first pass effect is simply a presystemic metabolism wherein it prevents your drug products, class, from ever reaching into the bloodstream. Okay? And one of the most common enzyme responsible for that would be the CYP3A4. Okay, wherein your medication, class, here from the GI tract, okay, ito na, GI tract, 100% siya. Pero because of the effects of the CYP3A4, okay, approximately only 30% enters the bloodstream. Okay? Or, halimbawa, minsan, class, ang nangyayari is, nasa bloodstream na ang gamot. Ayan, yung 30% na yun. What happened here, class, is using the P-glycoprotein. This is an active transport process. Okay? It pumps the drug going into the liver. At pagdating sa liver, ano nangyari? Andyan na yung mga source ng enzymes. So, na-metabolize palalo yung 30% na yan. So, from 30%, naging approximately 15% na lang yung natira sa original 100%. Right? Kaya, nangyari is, from 100% entering the GI tract, ang natira, 15% na lang. Now, let's talk about, class, drug excretion. Now, of course, class, drug excretion, the main organ involved here will, of course, be the kidneys. Okay, a while ago, we were talking about the liver. Now, this time, we'll talk about the kidneys naman. So drug excretion class, the removal of the intact drug or the final elimination of drugs from the body. Normally class, the drug should be in its ionized water-soluble form. Okay, pero some drugs can again be eliminated class in their unchanged form. So there are various excretory pathway, but again, the most prominent of course would always be the kidneys. Sama na rin natin ng liver. So, the kidney class is the main excretory organ for the removal of metabolic waste products. And the functional unit of our kidney is the nephron. Approximately 1 million 1 million nephrons are in each kidney. So, the nephron class serves as the filter. Okay, para siya yung mesh wire that prevents the filters out toxins from the body. So, the kidney class mainly have three functions. Excretory, okay, which is what we discuss in pharmacokinetics, regulatory, okay, and then secretory. In terms of its regulatory function class, it maintains the normal body fluid volume and electrolyte composition of the body. Okay, so it regulates the electrolyte contents of blood by by the conservation or excretion of minerals. Okay, it can regulate the acid-base balance of the blood. Okay, normally by the carbonic anhydrase, the enzyme carbonic anhydrase. And it regulates the blood volume by conserving and excreting water. Dito ngayong class papasok ang renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Okay, so that's part of the regulatory function of the kidneys. Now, as for its secretory function class, it has two main types. Okay? For the secretory function, it has its endocrine function. Okay, specifically under endocrine function class, it involves the secretion of renin, okay, which again is under the RAAS. All right, I won't discuss this in detail class because you'll be discussing this in pharmacology, in pharmacodynamics. Okay, so one thing that you have to remember lang class is that the renin is a neuropeptide, okay, responsible for modulating the blood pressure. And the other one class is the production of erythropoietin. Erythropoietin class is a hormone responsible for stimulating your bone marrows to produce RBC. Okay? So yeah, erythropoietin class, target niya is the bone marrow. Okay? Ito yung si renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Yung tatlong yan. Iikot lang yan. Okay? Alright. So vasopressin class and parathyroid hormones are all coming from usually from the pituitary gland, which stimulates the kidneys to work. Now, there are three basic processes that occur in the kidney class in terms of its secretory functions. So there's glomerular filtration, tubular secretion, and then tubular reabsorption. In terms of glomerular filtration class, this is the part wherein the solutes, okay, the solutes class are pushed through the kidneys, okay, via the Bowman's capsule to facilitate class its removal from the body, then conserving macromolecules like the proteins and then the glucose. Okay, then this will then involve an active secretion process, specifically in the proximal tubule. Okay, and most of the time, class, drugs can affect this site here. Right, this is the most affected site of the nephrons of the nephrons. Okay, by drugs. All right. So can be affected by other drugs, and the main site for interaction in the kidneys, yung proximal tubule natin. Now class, pagdating naman dito sa may distal tubule, okay, nagkakaroon tayo dyan ng passive reabsorption. Usually the reabsorption of lipid-soluble unionized drugs. Kaya nga important dito class yung, remember what we discussed in ion trapping, the ion trapping principle, or in the extent of ionization. Okay, if you want your drug to be a weak acid drug to be reabsorbed back into the body, make sure that the urine is acid also. Para mag-exist siya in its unionized state, follows, which will allow the drug to be reabsorbed back into the systemic circulation. And that usually happens here in the distal tubule. Okay? Then the collecting ducts class, lalabas na lang dyan are the ionized lipid-insoluble drugs, and we'll just follow the urine, or we'll just go with the urine. Okay? So here's another thing, class, or another representation of how the filtration system works inside the body. So normally, class, blood flow goes here, blood goes here, okay, in this capillary, and then dito na ngayon mangyayari ang filtration. Now, class, because of the blood pressure, mapupush out yung mga solutes dito. Okay? water lalabas dyan, solutes. Ito kumbaga kasi parang mesh wire that will filter out the small molecules, which is normally the ionized and the waste products. Nakakalabas dito yan. Okay? Pero yung mga macromolecules like glucose and proteins, it stays inside. Okay? Hindi siya lalabas dito. Hindi siya lalabas pag ganun. Alright? Hindi siya lalabas pag ganyan. Yung mga maliliit na molecules lang and drugs that are metabolized. So this is where filtration works. So water, nutrients, and waste are filtered from the glomerular capillaries into the Bowman's capsule and into the nephrons. Na yung matitirang glucose and proteins will stay in the bloodstream. Dito yun. Okay. So lumabas na kasi yung waste products. Okay, lumabas yung waste products. Ang nangyayari next dyan is the tubular reabsorption. Now take note itong pulang ito, this red here is an artery. Okay, it's a blood vessel. Now class, in the tubular area here, nagkakaroon tayo ng sa proximal tubule, okay, nagkakaroon tayo ng reabsorption. So in the proximal tubule, most water and nutrients are reabsorbed into the blood. So remember class, yung lumabas dito, sa may yellow portion na yan, okay, what we have here are water and solutes, waste products, nutrients, electrolytes. Okay? Yung mga electrolytes pa dyan. So class, oftentimes, here in the proximal tubule, yung water na nandito na sa yellow na yan, okay, pwede pang bumalik dito. Okay, babalik sa bloodstream. Nagkakaroon tayo tinatawag na tubular reabsorption. Okay? So the water can be reabsorbed and some of the nutrients can be reabsorbed back into the systemic circulation. Alright? So from the proximal tubule, babalik dito sa bloodstream na to. Okay? Or sa, sa blood vessel na to. Okay? So sige. So dito ngayong class, tatakbo ulit yung waste products natin. Okay, takbo. Diyan pa yung tubig. Siyempre may tubig na yan. Okay? Pagdating dito class, sa may distal tubules, okay, additional wastes are actively secreted into the tubule from the blood. Now class, here's the bloodstream. Okay, here's a blood vessel. Ang nangyayari class, minsan kasi may nakakalusot na waste products. Diba? Dapat yung waste products lumabas dito. Okay? Dito dapat lumabas yung waste products dyan pa lang. Eh may iba nakakapasok pa, nakakaligtas, sumasama sa blood. Sumasama sa blood. Okay, pagdating dito ka sa sa distal tubule, right? Nababawasan pa sila lalo. So they are actively excreted back into the or going into the collecting tubules. All right? Or sa distal tubule, binabalik doon yung waste or nilalabas doon yung waste products. All right? So additional wastes are actively secreted into the tubule from the blood. Now pagdating dito class sa collecting tubules natin. Alright? So, in the collecting duct, additional water may leave the blood, creating urine that is more concentrated than the blood. So, pwedeng yung water here, okay, na lumabas kanina, pwedeng bumalik ulit sa bloodstream. Right? Kaya nangyayari class, nako-concentrate lalo yung urine natin. Kaya nagkakaroon siya ng kulay. Alright? So, yun siya. So, that's the entire process class of filtration and excretion in the nephron, in just one nephron. And take note, each kidneys have approximately 1 million of this. Okay? Now, the loop of Henle nga pala, before I forget. The loop of Henle, ito yun. Loop of Henle. This is the loop of Henle. Okay? This is where urine is also being concentrated. So, meaning, in the loop of Henle class, this is the part where water is reabsorbed back. Okay? In the loop of Henle. This is where water, most of the water, majority of the water is reabsorbed back to the bloodstream. Okay? That's why notice, saan ba most diuretics would work? Where? In the loop of Henle, such as furosemide. Okay? Which prevents the reabsorption of water naman. Alright? Okay. So, glomerular filtration class is a process wherein drugs pass from the blood into the nephron by perfusing across the fenestrated capillaries of the Bowman's capsule. We say fenestrated class, parang mesh wire. Okay? So, drugs are transported by passive diffusion. Small, non-ionic drug pass more readily through the glomerulus. And protein-bound drugs do not get filtered. Bakit? Ang laki kasi nila. Hindi sila magkakasya dun sa mesh or sa filter natin. Okay? So, rate of filtration depends on blood flow, similar to distribution. Okay? Kaya importante talaga ang blood flow. And increased free drug in the plasma increases the glomerular filtration. So, usually, class, the glomerular filtration is responsible for the filtration of, take note of this, low molecular weight molecules, such as waste products, electrolytes, and so on and so forth. Kasi, class, on the other hand, okay, the hepatic excretion naman kasi, or hepatic excretion, class, is mainly used for substances having higher molecular weights. Normally, molecular weights higher than 500 grams per mole. Okay? So, drugs mainly excreted in the bile. This is usually by the biliary excretion. Okay? And this is ideal, class, for organic substances. Organic or lipids. Lipid substances. Lipid/non-polar. Okay? Kasi, class, ano lang ba usually ang mga substances with molecular weight higher than 500? Usually oils. Okay? So, most oily substances, class, or compounds that are of high molecular weight are excreted by the biliary excretion. Ito naman, class, yung pag-excrete natin ng gamot or ng substance sa poops. Okay? Sa feces. Right? So, organic anions, ayun, kita nyo, puro organic. And polar unchanged molecules or glucuronide conjugates. So, drug transport requires active transport, and the excretion of drugs via the bile, okay, increases with a concomitant decrease in renal excretion. So, pag hindi na kaya, class, ng kidneys, tumutulong na yung liver. So, what are some factors influencing biliary excretion? Okay, take note lang, class, when we talk about the biliary excretion, obviously, involved dito ang bile. And if you can remember from our previous discussions, the bile, class, is responsible for emulsifying oily substances, making them more water soluble. So, some factors includes bile production, of course. Increased bile production increases biliary excretion. Okay? So, food rich in protein increases bile secretion. And choleresis, this term, class, refers to the formation of bile in the liver. Okay, choleresis. Next one is bile flow. So, a decrease in bile flow obviously decreases biliary excretion. Okay, what usually causes a decrease in bile flow, class, is the formation of gallstones. Okay, binabarahan mo kasi yung tubo kung saan dumadaan ang bile. So, nagdi-decrease talaga yung bile flow pag may bara. Now, class, the process in which the bile is flowing, or the gallbladder is emptying itself to produce bile or to release bile, okay, is called cholekinesis. The term kinesis, meaning movement. So, the emptying of bile from the gallbladder, class, is called cholekinesis. And then another factor that influences biliary excretion is the route of administration. So, drugs given per orally may be extracted into the bile to a greater extent than the IV given medications. Okay? So, that's per orally. Baka isipin nyo kasi oral lang na sa oral cavity lang eh. Okay, that's drugs given per orally. Okay. Another thing, class, we have to talk about, okay, would be the enterohepatic circulation. Right? So, it's the cycle in which the drug is absorbed, excreted into the bile, and then reabsorbed again. Okay? So, drugs excreted as glucuronide conjugate will become hydrolyzed back into the GIT, back to the parent drug by action of the beta-glucuronide enzyme present in the intestinal bacteria. So, an example of this, class, would be estrogen. Okay? Si estrogen kasi, class, oftentimes would be, ito. Actually, estrogen ang di-discuss dito eh. Right? It's usually metabolized via glucuronidation. So, it becomes a glucuronide conjugate. Pero what happens, class, is that it's hydrolyzed back in the GIT. Okay? So, naging glucuronide na siya. So, supposed to be lalabas na yan sa feces. Okay? Pero what happens, class, the bacteria, intestinal bacteria that we have in the GI tract can actually convert the glucuronide conjugate of estrogen back into its parent estrogen ulit. Alright? So, are we clear? So, ibig sabihin, class, nare-recycle si estrogen sa katawan natin. Okay? Now, that's the reason why, class, oftentimes, you do not take estrogen together with antibiotics. Why? Nawawalan ang efficacy ang estrogen mo if you take it with antibiotics. Because, class, remember, to be more specific, broad-spectrum antibiotics. Because remember, this intestinal bacteria helps your estrogen to be reactivated. So, without this intestinal bacteria, walang magre-reactivate sa metabolized estrogen. So, nawawalan ng efficacy yung estrogen. Okay? Are we clear? Okay. So, drugs that undergo enterohepatic circulation are ethinyl estradiol, okay, or estrogen, indomethacin, and morphine. So, other routes of excretion, class, of course, would include salivary, mammary, and then excretion of drugs sa sweat. Pero, of course, class, hindi ganun ka-common ang, ang sweat as a main source of excretion or as an excretory pathway for drugs. Okay? Alright. So, some drugs that can be excreted via the expired air, okay, genital excretion, or via intestinal secretion. You guys can just read this. No need to explain. Now, let's talk about class drug clearance. Okay? When we talk about clearance, class, we're simply talking about a measurement of drug elimination from the body. Okay? So, how much of the drug is being cleared from the body? So, the total body clearance, class, is the sum total of all clearance processes in the body, including clearance through the kidneys, okay, lungs, and liver. So, when we talk about total clearance, class, we're going to combine the clearance from your kidney, from the lungs, from the liver. Siyempre, toxic naman kung magkukumpute tayo ng sandamakmak na ganun, right? So, that's the reason why, class, most often than not, we're just discussing the most significant route of excretion, which is the renal clearance. And the computation, class, for renal clearance is simply VD times K, or the volume distribution multiplied to your rate of elimination. Let's not talk about the other clearances. Kaya hindi ko kayo pakukumputin yan. We'll just simply talk about renal clearance. So, drugs clearance, class. So, clearance is a descriptive term used to evaluate the efficiency of drug removal from the body. So, the better the clearance class of a drug is, then it means that your body is capable of clearing that drug from your body efficiently. Okay, so clearance is a first order process. The amount of drug removed depends on the concentration. Now, clearance or the rate out can be calculated from the dose, rate in, and average steady state concentrations. So here are some formulas, class, we use to compute for clearance. So depending on what's given for each scenario that you will be faced with, okay, then you can use, class, the appropriate formulas for it, to compute for it. So halimbawa, you're given multiple doses. Okay, you are giving the drug multiple times. So obviously, class, CPSS ang gagamitin dyan. CPSS, dose and dosing interval. Okay, so dose divided by dose interval divided by CPSS. Okay? Then, of course, the most common one, the renal clearance, VDK. If you're given AUC and dose, then you can use this formula, class. Clearance equals dose divided by AUC. Okay, you can compute for that. Alright? Tapos, class, ito pa nga pala, once you get clearance, you can obviously get VD. Okay? Pag-compute yun ng AUC. So, something I want you guys to take note of. Alright? Baka mamaya magbigay ako ng computation for area under the curve. Bibigay ko lang yung dose. So, kayo magkukompute ng K. Sasabihin ko, compute for VD. Remember, class, if you're going to compute for VD, compute for clearance muna using the dose divided by AUC. Alright? Yan. Bilugan natin. Okay? And then, of course, total body clearance, usually don't ask for this na. Okay? Pero just in case, at least alam nyo na. Okay? Clearance via the renal, hepatic, and others. Now, class, the units for drug clearance, please take note, is always a unit of volume over time. So, it can either be ml per minute or liter per hour. That's drug clearance. So, for drug clearance, class, we can compute for the fraction of drug in the body eliminated per unit time. Okay? So, such as ito na nga yun. Okay? VDK. Or, we can determine the rate of elimination. Now, class, please take note, hindi ito yung K na rate of elimination or elimination constant natin. Okay, rate of elimination, class, in terms of how much drug is eliminated every hour or how much drug is eliminated every minute. Alright? So, ang units kasi, class, ng rate of elimination, kaya hinighlight ko dito, ROE yan, hindi yan KE. ROE, okay, when I'm going to ask for what's the rate of elimination of the drug, okay, this is referring to how much in milligrams per hour. How much of the drug is being eliminated, how much of the drug is being eliminated per hour. Formula for that, class, is simply clearance multiplied to your current plasma concentration. Okay, or your plasma concentration. Usually CP sub 0 or CPSS. Okay? And next one, class, would be, of course, the fraction of the total drug removed per unit of time. This one is, ito, elimination rate constant. Okay, KEL. And that's clearance over VD. Nanggaling lang naman dito sa formula na to. Okay? So if the volume distribution is increased, then the elimination rate will decrease. And the half-life will increase, but the clearance won't change. This is referring, class, to proportionality. Okay? Sige, pakita ko na. So, di ba sabi natin, class, clearance equals VDK. VD times K. So, meaning, class, clearance is directly proportional to VD and K. So, an increase in volume distribution, then there is going to be an increase in clearance. Okay? When the rate of elimination, class, okay, will decrease, then obviously clearance will also decrease most often than not. Alright? Okay. Now, class, if I'm going to expand on this, okay, clearance equals VD times 0.693 divided by half-life. Saan nanggaling ito? This is the formula for K. So this is how, class, we can relate clearance to half-life. So oftentimes, class, if you decrease clearance, okay, if you decrease clearance, tumataas yung half-life. Okay? Most of the time naman. Pero usually, class, ang effect ng half-life na to is mostly associated with the K. So an increase in half-life means a decrease in K. Okay, yun lang masasabi dito. Then KEL will decrease, then half-life will increase. Pero most often than not, clearance won't change naman. Hindi naman ganun ka-significant yung change sa clearance. Okay? Okay. So, renal clearance, class, simply defined as the removal of drug from the apparent volume distribution per unit of time via the kidneys. So, factors that affects this would, of course, be age, gender, or sex. Clearance is approximately 10% lower in females than in males. Okay, so mas mabilis daw mag-clear ng mga males oftentimes. And then disease states. So, renal clearance is reduced in patients with kidney disease and cardiac disease. Cardiac disease, class, kasi mas mababa, most likely, ang blood flow. Now, an application of this class would, of course, be the creatinine clearance. Okay? I think familiar na sa inyo to. Okay? So, I won't be discussing this too much. Pero just a reminder lang, class, when using the creatinine clearance, the most common equation used here is the Cockcroft and Gold equation. Okay? Where for males, class, the formula is 140 minus age times body weight divided by 72 times serum creatinine. Okay? Age should be in years. The body weight, class, should be in kilograms. And then the serum creatinine should be expressed in milligrams per deciliter. Now, class, ang problem lang is, most of the time, yes, your serum creatinine is given in milligrams per deciliters. Pero sometimes, class, it's given in millimole per liter. Okay? So, just so you know, class, sinulat ko dyan sa ilalim ng handouts nyo yung, yung conversion. Pero ang conversion lang naman yan, class, is 1 milligram per deciliter is equal to 18 times kung ano yung millimole per liter mo. Okay? So, are we clear? So, class, kung ano yung millimoles mo, kung binigay halimbawa ang units ng serum creatinine in millimoles, just multiply that to 18, ang kalalabasan nun is in milligrams per deciliters na siya. Alright? And then vice versa, kung halimbawa, kailangan mo ang millimoles, ang binigay sa is milligram per deciliter, yung milligram per deciliter mo, divide mo lang by 18. So, ang conversion factor mo dito is 18. Alright? Now, for females, on the other hand, class, same formula here. Okay, same formula for females, yun nga lang, multiplied to 0.85. Now, bakit 0.85? Okay, ang sabi raw kasi nila, class, ang total muscle mass ng female is only 85% as compared to that of the male. Mas marami raw kaming muscles, mga lalaki, kaysa sa mga babae. Well, one main reason for that is we have more testosterone than females. And testosterone is very important for muscle growth. Okay? The 72 nga pala, class, na constant value dito is usually added there to adjust the creatinine clearance based on the average body surface area, which is 1.73 meters squared. Now, what if bata ang inyong patient? Kasi yung formula kanina is considered for adults. Kung bata yung class, usually we adjust the creatinine clearance based on the BSA. So whatever your computed creatinine clearance is, multiply nyo lang sa BSA ng bata, divided by 1.73. Now, I hope you haven't forgotten the formula for BSA. That's simply height in centimeters times weight in kilograms divided by 3,600 square root of that. Okay, the unit should be in meters squared. Okay? Okay. So, here's a table lang, class, showing to you na whatever creatinine clearance you compute, okay, may corresponding meaning yon. So, if it's greater than 90 or equal to 90, it means that the renal function is normal so far, okay? So if it's between 60 to 89, slightly reduced, and so on and so forth. All right? Okay, so that's pretty much, class, my last slide. So again, I hope you learned something new. Okay, and I'll see you guys around.